welcome to all of you, and we pray that Allah bless our gathering tonight, make it beneficial in this series on the heroes of Islam. And today, inshallah ta'ala, we'll be speaking about one of the great compilers of hadith, one of the scholars who was blessed with a brilliant memory. So much so that it was said that he would not look at a book once except he memorized it. This great Imam, he is from the town of al-Bukhari. His name is Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari, rahimallahu ta'ala. May Allah bless him and may Allah accept from his efforts. Imam al-Bukhari was born in the city of Bukhara, which is in a land current day Uzbekistan. And he was born in the year 194 after the Hijrah. 194 after Hijrah. Uzbekistan, or perhaps Iran, somewhere in that area, which is currently nearby to what they call the Khorasan, which is where Imam al-Bukhari was born. Imam al-Bukhari, rahmatullah alayh, as a child, he studied hadith from his city, in his town. And his father was also a renowned scholar, Ismail. He was a scholar of hadith and fiqh, and he learned from Imam Malik. His father was a student of Imam Malik, rahmatullah alayh. So Imam Bukhari, he came from a family of knowledge. He came from a family of people devoted to the Islamic sciences. Imam Bukhari, rahmatullah alayh, his father passed away when he was a child. So he ended up learning with his mother's support, and his father took care of him, provided for him enough wealth that he could study. And so he memorized the Quran, and by the age of 10 or 11 years old, he says, I began studying hadith. And an interesting story. Imam al-Bukhari, he used to sit in a halaqah in Bukhara by one of the shuyukh of that town. His name was al-Dakhili. Al-Dakhili was one of the scholars in Bukhara. So Imam Bukhari was 11 years old, and he went to al-Dakhili's halaqah, right? He went to study hadith with al-Dakhili, a big scholar at that time. And so al-Dakhili began narrating a hadith. And during the hadith, he says that Abu Zubair heard from Ibrahim. And so Imam Bukhari, he raised his voice and he said, Shaykh, Abu Zubair did not learn from Ibrahim. It is Zubair that learned from Ibrahim. And so the Shaykh said, are you sure? And he said, yes. Imam Bukhari said, check your notes. So al-Dakhili, he checked his notes, and indeed, it was not Abu Zubair that learned from Ibrahim, but it was Zubair. So he detected a mistake in the chains of the narration. So you can see at the age was 11 years old. At that time, he was able to detect mistakes in the chains of narratives. Can you see how brilliant he was? How old are you? 10. So he was like your age. And he was able to correct one of the great scholars of that time. So he had a brilliant memory. His mind, he was able to memorize the names and lives of narrators in a way that it was almost like it was alive in his mind. And some of the scholars, there's one scholar, his name is Ishaq ibn Rahawayh. Ishaq ibn Rahawayh, he was a great muhaddith, scholar of hadith, and he was one of the teachers of Imam Bukhari. But he says, one time I was sitting with al-Bukhari, and we were listening to some hadith, and a word came up in that hadith. That word that in that hadith, its name, it was Kayharana. Kayharana. So Ishaq ibn Rahawayh, he said, I asked Bukhari, what is Kayharana? Imam al-Bukhari, he said, it's a town in Yemen. And Muawiyah, he sent a Sahabi there to teach them, and the person who narrated this hadith, he heard two hadith from that Sahabi. So the Ishaq ibn Rahawayh, he said, I was amazed how Imam Bukhari memorized the names of narrators and places and when they met and who they met at each occasion. And he said he had such a brilliant memory as if it was happening in front of his eyes. Imam al-Bukhari, rahmatullahi alayhi, when he was the age of 16, he went to Mecca for Hajj with his mother. And during that stay, in Hajj, there's so many people come together, many scholars. And Imam al-Bukhari had already learned as much knowledge as he could in Bukhara. So he decided to stay in Mecca and learn from the ulama of Mecca and Medina. So he stayed there for roughly a period of 6 to 8 years, something like this, traveling between Mecca, Medina. He took trips to Egypt, to Syria, and many, many trips to Iraq. And he said during this time when I was in Medina and Mecca, he learned so many hadith from the scholars of that land. And he even wrote a book called Al-Tarikh al-Kabir. There's a famous book by Imam Bukhari. It is called The Big History. And in it he has his biographies of 20,000 narrators. 20,000 hadith narrators. In this book it's called Tarikh al-Kabir. It takes about 9-10 volumes. How old was Imam Bukhari when he wrote this book?
16.
He was 16 when he went to Mecca. He wrote it at 18 years old. 18 years old, he wrote a book with 20,000 narrators and their lives and their history. SubhanAllah. So he began, that was one of his first books. Imam Bukhari, during these trips, he went to Baghdad. And the great scholar in Baghdad at that time, his name was Imam Ahmad. You all heard of Imam Ahmad, right? Imam Ahmad was one of the main teachers in Baghdad at that time. And Bukhari, he learned a lot from Imam Ahmad. He spent a lot of time studying hadith as well as fiqh with Imam Ahmad. After this time, he left Imam Bukhari, rahmatullahi alayhi. He continued his studies. It said that he had 1,080 teachers. He narrates hadith from 1,080 scholars. Imam Bukhari, his teachers, basically he had different categories of teachers. Some of his teachers, they were at a very high level. They heard directly from the tabi'een and they narrated from the tabi'een. Those were the highest level of Imam Bukhari's teachers. Some other of his teachers, they met some of the tabi'een, but they don't narrate from them. So they didn't have that high level. And some other of his teachers, they didn't meet from the tabi'een. And others were like Imam Bukhari himself, that were learning from the people who learned from the tabi'een. And the last category of his teachers were people younger than him. Imam Bukhari, he had some teachers that were younger than him. One of the teachers that he had younger than him was Imam at-Tirmidhi. Imam at-Tirmidhi, you heard of the Sunan of at-Tirmidhi? Have you heard that book before? It's one of the books. Imam at-Tirmidhi was actually a student of Imam Bukhari. But Imam Bukhari narrates one hadith that is from at-Tirmidhi. He learned from at-Tirmidhi, one hadith. And Imam at-Tirmidhi, he's so proud of this. He says, I have one hadith that Imam Bukhari learned from me. He put it in his Sahih, his book called Sahih al-Bukhari. So Imam at-Tirmidhi, he was a student, but at the same time, Imam Bukhari learned something from him. And so he had a few students that he also took and learned hadith from. Imam al-Bukhari was extremely pious. And it is said that he would never say anything bad about any person by name. In his own book, in the Sahih al-Bukhari, sometimes he has some sections of the Sahih where he responds to some of the views of the Hanafi school, Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. But he never mentions Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. He says, some people say this, and then he quotes some ahadith in response to that view. So for example, Imam Bukhari, he wants to talk about the praying in the small towns. And Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, his view is that you don't pray Jummah, Salah in the small towns. So Imam Bukhari, he brings a chapter, he says the hadith about praying in the small towns, and then he says some people, they said this, and these are the texts that say that you should pray in a small town. So he didn't even mention Imam Abu Hanifa. He didn't either. This is out of so much respect for Abu Hanifa, he did not want to say his name because he respected him. And in fact, one of his main teachers, Ibn Rahawayh, Ishaq ibn Rahawayh, was a Hanafi. So we'll find later that some scholars even said Imam Bukhari, he was Hanafi in his madhab. So this is how much he respected Abu Hanifa, rahmatullah alayhi. Also, Imam Bukhari, when he went to the hadith lectures, they say about him, that they had a lecture for narrating the hadith, he would never write anything down. So some people, they would ask him, why are you wasting your time? You're in the lecture, you're not writing anything. He said, I memorized everything I heard. And 15 days later, he wrote down the hadith, he was just compiling them from his memory, and he would write them sometimes 2 or 3 weeks later. And Imam Bukhari himself, he says, sometimes I learn a hadith in Baghdad, and I write them down in Syria. And sometimes I learn hadith in Syria, and I write them down in Egypt. His memory was that brilliant, that he could memorize the hadith, and then write them many months later without making any mistakes. They had, in fact, some people heard of Imam Bukhari and his incredible memory, and they wanted to test him. And one of the most famous narration stories about it, Imam Bukhari, he came to Baghdad. And in Baghdad, there was many big scholars waiting for him. 10 of the greatest ulama of Baghdad, they were waiting for Imam Bukhari, and when he arrived, they wanted to test his knowledge of hadith. So each of them, they stood up and they said, Imam Bukhari, we're going to narrate some hadith to you. Please tell us if they're correct or if there's any mistake. So the first of the scholars, he stood up and he began narrating hadith. And he said, An Fulan, An Fulan, An Fulan, this is the hadith. Imam Bukhari said, I never heard that hadith. So he narrated another one. Imam Bukhari said, I didn't hear that hadith. 1, 2, 3, he narrated 10 hadith, and every time Imam Bukhari said, I never heard of such a hadith. Then they moved on to the next scholar. The next scholar, again, he began narrating hadith. And in each one, he purposely put a mistake in it. He wanted to test Imam Bukhari to see if he would say, yes, I know this hadith. So he purposely made a mistake, just like the previous Imam. And he narrated it, and Imam Bukhari said, I've never heard any of these hadith. The third Imam came, and the same thing, he inserted one mistake in every hadith. Until all of the 10 scholars, they narrated hadith to Imam Bukhari. And every one of them had a mistake. And every time Imam Bukhari noticed the mistake, he was aware of the mistake, and he said, none of these hadith are correct. So after they were finished, Imam Bukhari says, yes, now let me tell you the correct narration of these 100 hadith. And he began from number 1, and he said, this is what you said, and this is the correction. Number 2, this is what you said, this is the correction. Number 3, and he narrated all 100 hadith, exactly the hadith that he had heard, but with the corrections in them, in the correct order. So Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani is a great scholar. He mentions his story, and he says, what amazes me, it's not that Imam Bukhari noticed the mistake. He's a scholar of hadith. They notice the mistakes, right? That's their job, is to find mistakes in hadith. But what amazes me is that he heard 100 hadith, and he memorized every single one of them in order, and was able to repeat them back after only hearing them one time. And he memorized all of those that were narrated and corrected all 100 without writing anything. So you see how careful his memory was, how brilliant his memory was. Imam Bukhari, rahmatullah alayh, he also he went to Basra. And Basra is another town in Iraq. Baghdad was one place. He went to Basra, also seeking the knowledge of hadith. What happened in Basra? They wanted to test Imam Bukhari. They heard about Imam Bukhari, and they were so excited. Imam Bukhari is coming. Let's go and learn hadith from him. So when he arrived, even the scholars, they came to learn from him. Imam Bukhari, he began by telling them, you are the people of Basra, I am going to teach you hadith that are narrated by people from Basra that you don't know about. He was so knowledgeable, he's not from Basra, but he told the people in Basra, I'm going to narrate hadith by people who come from your town, but you never learned them from them. See how much knowledge he has? He knew the knowledge of the people from that town that they had not heard, even though he had never been living there in Basra. Also, Imam al-Bukhari, rahmatullah alayhi, he was so praised by his contemporaries. And one of the scholars, Ibn Hajar, he said, if we were to write down all of the good things people said about Bukhari after he passed away, we would never be able to fill the books. We would never be able to have enough books. Too many things people praise the Imam Bukhari. However, during his lifetime, we find some statements of his contemporaries, people who lived with him. What does Imam Ahmad say? Imam Ahmad, he says, Khurasan has never seen the like of anyone like Muhammad ibn Ismail. Who is Muhammad ibn Ismail? Al-Bukhari. He said, there has never been one like him. Another student, Imam Muslim. Imam Muslim, you heard of Sahih Muslim? Sahih Muslim. Imam Muslim was a student of Imam Bukhari. And Imam Muslim, he says, I have never, he says that there is no sky that has ever covered a person greater than Imam Bukhari. There's no one under the sky greater than Imam Bukhari. This is his own student, Imam Muslim, who was also a scholar. And Imam Muslim, he once came to Imam Bukhari and he kissed him on his forehead and he begged Imam Bukhari, can I kiss your feet? I want to kiss your feet. O teacher of teachers, O master of hadith, O doctor of the defects of hadith. This is how he addressed Imam Bukhari. He wished that he could kiss his feet. See how much love he had for his teacher, rahmatullah alayhi, Imam. May Allah have mercy on both of them. Now, An-Naysaburi, he says that there's no one like him. His knowledge of hadith is like that of Imam Ahmad. His knowledge in hadith is more than Imam Ahmad. And more than Rahaway, his teacher. And he says he has 20 degrees more knowledge than any of those other people. And then he said, whoever says anything bad about Imam Bukhari, may 20 curses be upon him. See how much respect and love An-Naysaburi had, this scholar, for Imam Bukhari. And he also said, An-Naysaburi, he says, if I am teaching hadith and Imam Bukhari enters the door, I become filled with fear. Do you know why he becomes filled with fear? And he says, An-Naysaburi, he says, if I'm narrating hadith and Imam Bukhari came in, I will be filled with fear. Do you know why? Yes? An-Naysaburi is a scholar of hadith as well. But he says, when I see Imam Bukhari, I become scared. Why do you think he got scared? Yes? Yes? Okay, yes, that could be a reason. He felt so much respect and awe for him. Maybe he was afraid that if I make any mistake, Imam Bukhari is going to correct me. Because he's so knowledgeable. Perhaps that's another reason. Al-Razi, who was another, he was asked about Bukhari or Abu Zar'a, and he said, Imam al-Bukhari, he is so knowledgeable of hadith that I can never teach him a hadith that I know that he doesn't. However, other scholars, I can teach them some hadith and I can learn from them hadith. So he said basically, Imam Bukhari, there's nothing I can teach him. Whereas these other great scholars, such as Abu Zar'a and others, I can learn from them and I can also teach them hadith. Imam Bukhari is considered an expert in finding the mistakes of the hadith, the ilal. Ilal are the hidden defects. Sometimes you have a hadith, that's attributed to the Prophet ﷺ, but in that hadith there's something there's some mistake in it. So Imam Bukhari was an expert in finding those mistakes. And one time Imam Bukhari saw a dream. In the dream, he saw the Prophet ﷺ, and he saw himself with a fan. And whenever there were some flies that were coming near to the Prophet ﷺ, he would blow the flies away with his fan. So after he saw this dream, he asked some people who were knowledgeable of dreams, what does this mean that I saw a dream, the Prophet ﷺ was there, and I was blowing the fan to keep any flies that were trying to come near to him away from him. So then the scholar, he said, this means that those flies are the fake hadith, the false hadith that people attributed to the Prophet ﷺ, and you're keeping them away from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You're keeping people from attributing those false hadith to the Prophet ﷺ by pointing out their defects. So you see how he had such a beautiful role. Imam Bukhari's character. This is something we should all pay attention to. Imam Bukhari, he never would say ill things about the hadith narrators or use strong words. You know, sometimes when you're a hadith scholar and there's somebody in the chain that used to lie or that used to do a sin, you have to point that out. You have to say this person was a liar, so people will not learn hadith from him, right? Imam Bukhari never used the word he's a liar. What he would say is that this person, we should not, his narrations are abandoned. We don't take narrations from him. He didn't say he's a liar, he's this, but he just said we don't learn narrations from him. And he would say the reason, when he said we don't take narrations from him, it means that we cannot accept his narration. There's some fault in it. But he never used to backbite. Imam Bukhari, he says, I had never backbited about anybody since the day I learned backbiting is haram. So he would never dig up and spread faults about people. The most he would say, his narrations are not taken. That's how he was such a beautiful character. Imam Bukhari, rahmatullahi, also, he would try to stay away from any doubtful matters. Doubtful matters. You know what happened? One time he was on a ship. And he was carrying with him 100 ashrafis, 100 coins. And he met somebody on the ship, and this person started praising him and saying, oh, you're Imam Bukhari, you're such a famous scholar, and he became close friends with him. So during their conversation, the man, Imam Bukhari, told that man, I have some gold coins here, 1,000 gold coins, just as a conversation. So unfortunately, that man was a criminal. So what he did, he went on the ship and he started yelling and screaming, and saying, somebody stole my 1,000 gold coins. I had 1,000 gold coins, somebody stole it. Search the ship, what happened to it? And he started raising a hue and a cry to get all kinds of attention. So the people, they started searching. Who has the 1,000 gold coins? Imam Bukhari, he threw the gold coins over the ship and dumped it into the river. So they came, they searched his things, he didn't have any gold coins. And so, in the end, that man came back to Bukhari and he said, what happened to those gold coins? Imam Bukhari said, I threw them over the ship. The man said, why did you do that? Imam Bukhari, he said, I am a scholar of hadith. People trust my narrations of hadith. This is a big source of reward for me in the hereafter. If I get accused of stealing this treasure, then people will no longer learn my hadith. The treasure I have in the next world is much greater than any treasure I have in this world. See that? So he threw away his own money so that he would protect his dignity and his honor. That's how careful he was. Imam Bukhari, rahmatullahi, also he used to avoid, sometimes he says, I know of a hadith narrator, I learned 10,000 hadith from him. However, I don't narrate any of those hadith because I don't want to be accused of tadlis, which means I'm narrating hadith in a hidden way. It was the kind of thing that narrator had a little bit of doubt. So he said, I abandoned 10,000 hadith just so that people would not think that I learned from this person who had some kind of defect in it. See how careful he was. Imam Bukhari, was he just a narrator of hadith, or did he also learn fiqh? Did he also have knowledge of fiqh? Yes. He was a faqih, right? Remember, he studied with Imam Ahmad. And so he had knowledge of fiqh rulings. And in fact, Imam Bukhari, he says about himself that I never taught people hadith until I first learned about the rulings of the people of opinion, which means like the Hanafi school. He said, I didn't go out narrating hadith until first I learned the fiqh, the ra'i, how to properly interpret hadith. I didn't narrate hadith until I had learned the fiqh first. So Imam Bukhari was not simply a narrator of hadith, but he also understood the rulings and the application of the hadith in a correct way. And how do we learn about the fiqh of Imam Bukhari? Imam Bukhari, he didn't write a book talking only about fiqh, but actually we can find his fiqh in his Sahih. In the Sahih of Imam Bukhari, he has the titles, and in those titles he includes his fiqhi opinion. In the titles, the tarajim, he has his fiqhi opinions. And it's said that there were some scholars have written 9 volumes on the fiqh taken from the titles of the chapters of hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari. 9 volumes. Can you imagine how much? And in addition to that, if you look at any commentary in Sahih Bukhari, they talk about the titles of Imam al-Bukhari, the titles of the book of hadith. So how does he teach the fiqh through his titles? I gave you an example earlier. Remember the issue of do you pray Jummah in the small towns? Is that allowed or not? So Imam Bukhari, he'll say the chapter on praying Jummah in the small towns. And then he'll bring some hadith about it. So using that chapter, he was expressing a fiqhi position about whether one should pray the Jummah Salah in the small towns. You see how? So that was part of his methodology, part of his knowledge of fiqh. Imam Bukhari also, he had some views of Abu Hanifa that he responded to, that he didn't agree with, but the way that he responded to it, he would have chapters that, like for example, one chapter he has called the chapter on the hila, the tricks. And he talks about how it's prohibited in the Sharia to do tricks in order to get some kind of benefit. It's not allowed to use tricks, basically to get around the Sharia. So he disagreed with some of the views of Abu Hanifa, but he made a chapter about it, and he never mentions Abu Hanifa, rahmatullah alayhi, by name. Was Imam al-Bukhari a mujtahid? Does everybody know what mujtahid means? What is mujtahid? Somebody who has a level of knowledge where they can issue rulings and they can develop their own positions in fiqh without imitating anybody before them, right? Without following the usul of the Imam before them. So was Imam Bukhari, did he have his own madhab? Is there a madhab that he had? It's not known that he had his own madhab, even though many scholars praised him and said that he was like Imam Ahmad. Some of them said, rather he's even similar to Imam Malik in fiqh. But why doesn't he have a madhab? The scholars, they say that perhaps Imam Bukhari, he was too busy with hadith, he didn't have time to develop the science of fiqh. And he probably followed the other fuqaha because he felt that his specialization was in the area of hadith. So many muhaddithin, they had fiqh, but they decided to follow the other fuqaha because they wanted to focus their efforts on propagating hadith. Imam al-Bukhari, rahmatullah alayhi, some people, they say he was following the school of Imam Ahmad. Imam Ahmad. Ibn al-Qayyim, he says Imam Bukhari followed the school of Imam Ahmad. Some other scholars, they say that Imam Bukhari, he followed Abu Hanifa. Can you imagine that? They say Imam Bukhari was on the madhab of Abu Hanifa because of his positions that he took from Ibn Rahawayh. Ibn Rahawayh was a Hanafi scholar. And another group of scholars, they say that he was a Shafi'i, like Imam al-Suki. They say Imam Bukhari was Shafi'i. So every mother wants Imam Bukhari. They want to attribute it. They all claim it. But Imam Bukhari, rahmatullah alayhi, he appears to have benefited from all of these madhahib, and sometimes he exercised his own opinion on some issues. What happened to Imam Bukhari at the end of his life? Imam Bukhari at the end of his life, what happened to him? He had, unfortunately, a lot of fitna that happened to him. He went to Naysabur And the people of Naysapur, some of the people there was an Imam called Imam al-Bukhari. And Imam al-Bukhari, he was a little bit jealous of Imam Bukhari because all of the students were going to the lectures of Imam Bukhari. So he felt jealous of him, and so they conspired against him. And they said that Imam Bukhari believed that the Quran was the speech when you recite the Quran, that it's created. That the Quran is created when you recite the Quran. So this was a big fitna that happened to Imam al-Bukhari. Of course, Imam Bukhari, he didn't believe the Quran was created. And they asked him this question: when a person recites the Quran, is it created? Imam Bukhari, he said, Allah revealed the Quran as the speech of Allah, and our actions are created. And asking about this is an innovation. Don't ask about when we recite the Quran, is that recitation created or not? He said, this is an innovation. We know that the Quran is from Allah, it's not created. And we know that our actions are created, but don't ask about this topic. Is our speech, is it uncreated or created? He said, this is an innovation, this is a big one. So they tried to create some fitna around him. He was forced to leave Naysapur. He went to his hometown of Bukhara. And unfortunately, the same thing happened. Jealousy affected him, and he was forced to leave the town of Bukhara. And he was on the way to a place called Samarkand, and in that place, on his way, he passed away on Eid al-Fitr. As soon as Ramadan was over, the next day he passed away in the year 256 after Hijrah. Rahmatullah. Okay, so this is about the life of Imam al-Bukhari. This is the story of his life. What about the works of Imam Bukhari? What is some of his famous books? Do you know of any of his famous books? Yes.
Sahih al-Bukhari.
Sahih al-Bukhari. There's a book, it actually has a long title, Al-Jami', Sahih, Al-Musnad, and he gives it a long title. Imam Bukhari compiled a compilation of hadith that was 7,000 hadith. And in this book, he compiles only the most authentic hadith that he knew about in his time. He had learned more than 100,000 hadith. In fact, they say that Bukhari had another book which had 100,000 hadith and it's been lost. So out of those 100,000 or more, he put the 7,000 most authentic hadith in the Sahih al-Bukhari. In the Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari, sometimes he only narrates portions of the hadith in different places in the Sahih. Why would he do that? He'll narrate the same hadith, but he'll narrate maybe a little bit of it in one chapter, some other part of the same hadith in another chapter, and so on. Why does he do that?
To fit the heading of that chapter.
That's right, because his book was also a book of fiqh issues, so he would only use the part of the hadith that was necessary for that fiqh issue. Sometimes he would do it for other reasons too. Sometimes he would use a different chain of narrators to strengthen each other. He'll bring the same hadith, but he'll use a different chain of narrators, or a narrator that has an additional rawi or missing a rawi, just to show that that chain is also supporting and strengthening the other chains. So this is another reason why he repeats oftentimes some of the hadith in his Sahih. Imam Bukhari also, what is another book that he has? Tarikh al-Kabir, which is the biographies of 20,000 hadith narrators. He wrote it when he was 18 years old. This we talked about earlier. Tarikh al-Kabir is the science of the hadith narrators. Also, Imam al-Bukhari, he has another book called, you know another book of his? On good manners? Al-Adab al-Mufrad. It's called Kitab al-Adab al-Mufrad by Imam al-Bukhari. And in this book he talks about hadith relating to good manners and good characteristics. Any other books you can think of? They mentioned some of the other books. He has a book called Kitab al-Kuni, which is Imam Bukhari had a high level of knowledge. Sometimes they'll have a hadith narrator and they'll say Abu Fulan, like they'll say Abu Muhammad or Abu Aswad, but they didn't mention his real name. So when you study the hadith, you're thinking to yourself, who is this person? Who is Abu Muhammad or Abu Aswad? Actually, he has another name. Just like we said, his name, Imam Bukhari, is Abu Abdullah. If somebody tells you Abu Abdullah narrated a hadith, you might say, who's Abu Abdullah? So Imam Bukhari wrote a whole book. He took the kunyas of all of the different hadith narrators and he mentioned their real names. So that if somebody, they find Abu for somebody in a narrator, in a narration of hadith, they can look up in that book and find out who the true hadith narrator was. So that's another one of the works that he compiled. And they had a story about this. That somebody, he said that there was a hadith narrated by Abu Muhammad on another person on Abu Hamza. So nobody knew who that hadith was. And Imam Bukhari, he knew right away who what that chain of hadith was, because they were using the kunyas. And so he was able to decipher the narrations of those hadith. Okay, so then he also had a book in Aqidah, and it's called Khalq Af'al al-Ibad, the creation of the actions of the worshippers. Because what happens is that during his end of his life, there was a big fitna, right, where people were saying that he said the Quran was created. So he wrote a book proving that our actions are created, but the Quran is not created. But he wanted to show that the proofs and the evidences that our actions are all created. And one of his famous books is Kitab al-Ilm, which is the defects in the hadith. He talks about the defects in the hadith. And he was an expert, one of the foremost experts in the ilm, in the defects that are found in hadith. Rahmatullah alayhi. So this is, Imam al-Bukhari contributed greatly to the preservation of hadith in Ummah. But in addition to that, you see that he was also a scholar of fiqh, and he had so much respect for other shuyukh of his time. He never called any of the hadith narrators, he never cursed them or said they're liars. He always used terms of saying that his hadith are not taken, or we don't narrate his hadith. Things like that, that's all he would say. And he never backbited about anybody. And unfortunately, he went through many trials in the end of his life because of jealousy, because of hasad, that other people became jealous of him, and because of that, they opposed him. And they tried to attribute to him things that he never said. And one of those things is that he said that the Quran is created when you recite the Quran, but he said that the Quran is from Allah, and our actions are created. You know, some people, they try to say that our actions, only the good things are from Allah, and our bad deeds are from ourselves, we create them. Is this true? Everything is from Allah. If you said that somebody went and stole something, you say that Allah did not create that action. Of course, that would mean that there's some things that exist that Allah did not create. So everything is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what Imam Bukhari was saying, that everything that we do is a creation. But the Quran is the book of Allah, it's revealed, it's not created. But unfortunately, the fitna happened to him at the end of his life, and he was sent out of many towns, even though he was considered such a great scholar that there was never the likes of him. Did he have a book of tafsir? Commentary on the Quran? Salah? They say some books they mention in the tafsir of Imam Bukhari, but some of them are different. Was it a lost book, or is it a section in the Sahih? Because in the Sahih Bukhari, he has a whole section on tafsir of the Quran. So perhaps he might have had a separate book, or it might be from the Sahih of Bukhari. Alhamdulillah. Any questions about Sahih of Imam Bukhari? About his life or his works? There's almost a dozen commentaries on Sahih al-Bukhari. What's the most famous commentary on Sahih al-Bukhari?
Fath al-Bari.
Fath al-Bari by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. There's also another book called
Rajab al-Hanbali has one too, right?
I don't think it's Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali. I think it's Ibn Hajar al-Haytami. There's another Ibn Hajar, his name is Ibn Hajar al-Haytami. He also has a commentary on Sahih al-Bukhari. It's not, I think it's maybe a similar name. It might be called Fath al-Bari or different.
Ibn Rajab has one with the same name, I think.
Is it? Oh, okay. They mention some of them here, some of the commentaries. One is by Al-Aini. Al-Aini, he also wrote a commentary on Sahih al-Bukhari. Many words. They say here, Al-Aini, Umdat al-Qari, Irshad al-Shari, by al-Asqalani, another one. Kawakib al-Durari by al-Karamani. And so many of these. Ibn Battal is the famous one that I've heard of. It's another commentary on Sahih al-Bukhari. One question here. If you find a hadith in one of the other books of Imam Bukhari, like his book on the Adab, there's a hadith in there, can we mention that hadith and say narrated by al-Bukhari? Is that right to say that?
No. I don't think
No, right?
No.
Say Imam Bukhari has many books, right? He has one book called Sahih al-Bukhari, the authentic hadith. And he has other books that have some weak hadith, some strong hadith, that are not as authentic as Sahih al-Bukhari. So can somebody take a hadith from one of those other books and then say this hadith was narrated by al-Bukhari? Is it right to say that?
No. They should mention the book again.
If the change in narrations are if the change in narration can be followed and they can be found as sound, maybe, let me say maybe, because if some of them are sound, then
Yes. But what if it's a weak hadith?
no.
That's not right. See, that's a trick somebody might use. Take a weak hadith and say Bukhari narrated. When you say Bukhari narrated, right away people assume the Sahih of Imam Bukhari. They're thinking of the authentic hadith. So if you take a weak hadith and you say Bukhari narrated it, that could be misleading, because people will automatically assume this is authentic. So you could say Bukhari narrated it in his book of Adab, or in a Tarikh al-Kabir like that, but not say Imam Bukhari writes it. Yes?
Usually, if he narrated a hadith, usually it says him first and then the hadith. You know what I mean? Like,
okay.
we says that Abu Hurairah said.
Yes.
It means that it came directly from him.
Okay, yes. Abu Hurairah, the person narrated right before the hadith is the Sahabi who heard it from Prophet Muhammad. And that Sahabi, he passed it on to maybe like what they call the Tabi'een. And from the Tabi'een, some of the teachers of Imam Bukhari were students of the Tabi'een, or they were from the teachers. So Imam Bukhari took it maybe the third level down or the fourth level down. He has some hadith that only have three narrators, a few of them in the Bukhari, Sahih. That means there's only three people between Imam Bukhari and Prophet Muhammad. Some of them are four people in between, some of them are five people in between, which we talked about earlier, how depending on which teacher he got it from, some of the teachers were much closer to the time of the Sahaba, so there's only three people in the chain. And he has up to, I think, 6 or 7 in the chain. No. So yes, when we say al-Bukhari, it should be from the Sahih, otherwise we have to mention the name of the book. That wouldn't be right just to say that this is by al-Bukhari. Very good, mashallah. All right, any other questions on Imam al-Bukhari? Rahmatullah alayhi. So which madhab was Imam al-Bukhari? What was his madhab?
He looked at the opinions and made his own.
So he was mujtahid mutlaq?
Well, he followed others and he made tabjih, like in different times and stuff.
Most of the ulama, they say, we talked about this earlier, some ulama, they say that he might have been of the level of full ijtihad, but he didn't do that, he followed others, because the muhaddithin, they were very busy with hadith. They didn't have time to expound their madhab. They didn't have time to write, because if you want to form a madhab, you have to leave behind a huge amount of knowledge of fiqh, like usul al-fiqh, or the principles. So they didn't have time to do that. They were busy compiling and protecting hadith. So he might have been at that level, but they say that he didn't formulate his own madhab, but nobody took him as a mujtahid. Nobody followed his madhab after him. So they say that perhaps he was a follower of one of the other madhab. Some people say he was Ahmad, the school of Imam Ahmad, because he met Imam Ahmad and studied with him a lot. That was Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya's opinion. And others said that he was a follower of Abu Hanifa. Even though he differed on some of the branches, but they say that Ishaq ibn Rahawayh was a Hanafi, and he learned a lot, that was his teacher. And others, they say that he was from the school of Shafi'i, like Imam Subki. because a lot of his views are like the school of Shafi. But he did have some of his own opinions you find in the Sahih of Imam Bukhari. No, so he didn't formulate a new madhab, but sometimes within a madhab he might have had his own opinions. Okay, Jazakallah khairan. Anything else about Imam Bukhari? Questions about this? Yes.
Did he make like the first hadith book or?
Imam Bukhari is not the first hadith book. Muwatta was more than 150 years before Imam Bukhari, rahmatullah alayhi. But he was one of the first to make a Sahih hadith book, meaning that he only allowed Sahih hadith, even though the Muwatta, most of the ulama say that it's also authentic, completely authentic. But for example, Imam Ahmad, he included weak hadith, Hasan hadith. Imam Bukhari was the first one to say, I want to only put authentic hadith in my book and nothing else. So he was, his book is considered one of the first in the Sahih. After him there was others, like Sahih Muslim was a student. By the way, Tirmidhi and I think Nasa'i and Ibn Majah, others were students of Imam Bukhari. Imam Muslim was a student of Imam Bukhari. So others came after him. Ibn Khuzaymah, he made a book called Sahih Ibn Khuzaymah. Other scholars, they followed his methodology. But in the beginning, hadith books, they were not only authentic hadith. There was other hadith as well. Jazakallah khairan. Shaykh Sajid, any comments? Like Imam Bukhari?
Yeah, just say all of us, we have to have our love for our shuyukh beforehand.
Yes.
Continuation of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu
Sallallahu alayhi wa
alaihi wasallam. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue us on their way. Amen.
Ameen. Jazakallah khairan. And increase us in love of our imams and have mercy and shower His rahmah on al-Bukhari and on us with him and all of the believers inshallah. Jazakallah khairan. Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum.